It's March 2011. A guy is standing on the field at a minor league baseball game singing the national anthem in front of a crowd. Normal Sunday afternoon stuff. And halfway through the song, his phone buzzes in his pocket. He tries to ignore it, finishes the anthem. Then he looks down at the screen, and he just breaks down crying right there on the field in front of everyone. Now, if you saw that, you'd probably assume something terrible just happened. But it was actually the opposite. That text message was from Sherwin-Williams, yes, the paint company, and they had just agreed to spend nearly $29 million buying his product. For most people, that would just be a really good day. But for this guy, a broke ex-mechanic from a refinery town who'd been bankrupt, addicted to meth, and rejected by a cannabis dispensary just a few years earlier, it felt like the universe had finally stopped punching him in the face. His name was Jeff Karpoff, and that moment on the baseball field, that was supposed to be the end of a hard story. Instead, it was the beginning of one. Jeff grew up in Martinez, California, and if you've never heard of Martinez, that's kind of the point. It's not the kind of place people talk about. It's a gritty little refinery town sitting right on the Carquinez Strait, and Jeff used to joke it was where the sewer meets the sea. He wasn't being dramatic. His family's house sat about a mile from a massive Shell oil refinery, the kind of place where the air has a permanent smell, and you just get used to it. Down the road was a biker bar with a reputation for fights, stabbings, shootings, and worse. His parents split up when he was 3. His mom, Rosalie, worked 3 jobs to keep the family afloat. His dad, Ken, was mostly just gone. So Jeff grew up fast. By the time he was old enough to work, he was already hustling, polishing used tires for 10 cents each, fixing junk cars in the driveway, stocking shelves at the corner liquor store. In high school, he was the kid doing wheelies in the parking lot and splattering mud on teachers' cars. Not exactly headed for Harvard. After graduation, he tried to go legit, opened his own garage, but the state cited him for mishandling hazardous materials, and things started unraveling quickly. Money got tight, Jeff got into meth. Then he started selling it just to cover his debts. His mom started getting threatening calls from dealers looking for him. Eventually, the whole thing collapsed. Bankruptcy, lost houses, lost shops. By his mid-30s, Jeff Karpoff was exactly the kind of guy people in Martinez would quietly point to and say, "See, I told you so." Then Paulette came back into his life. He'd actually known Paulette since high school. She was his sweetheart from the same neighborhood, but she showed up again at exactly the right moment. She saw something in Jeff that Jeff couldn't see in himself anymore. She stood by him through the worst of it, helped him get clean. They got married, had 2 kids, Lauren and Matt, and together they decided to try one more time. Around 2002, they opened a small Land Rover repair shop called Roverland USA. Just a backstreet garage in Martinez, nothing fancy. But Jeff was genuinely good at fixing cars, and word spread fast. Customers were driving in from all over the Bay Area. For the first time in a long time, it actually felt like things were working. Then they got greedy. They started importing cheap auto parts from Mexico to try and boost the margins. The quality was so bad that one of their own mechanics flat out refused to install them on a customer's car. Complaints piled up, the reputation they'd worked so hard to build just crumbled. The shop failed. By 2007, Jeff was 36 years old, no job, bankrupt again, house in foreclosure, creditors coming at him from every direction. He even drove out to a cannabis dispensary in Santa Cruz trying to sell them low-grade product. They turned him down. He was paunchy with big blue eyes and what his coworkers called chipmunk cheeks. He chewed tobacco and swallowed it instead of spitting. Spent his Sundays watching NASCAR. Not exactly the picture of a man on the verge of building a $100 million company. But here's what you need to understand about Jeff Karpoff. He didn't know how to stop. No matter how many times life knocked him flat, the guy just kept swinging. One afternoon, a neighbor came to him with a simple problem. He wanted solar panels installed on his weekend house, but was worried about theft. Most people would have just said, get an alarm system and moved on. But Jeff's brain went somewhere different. He thought, what if the panels didn't have to stay on the roof at all? What if they were mounted on a trailer? You could tow it wherever you needed power, lock the panels flat while driving, then tilt them towards the sun once you parked. No theft risk, no permanent installation, just clean and quiet solar power you could take literally anywhere. He grabbed a pencil and sketched it out. Called it the solar eclipse. Now, here's the part that gets me. Jeff Karpoff, the man who was about to launch a solar energy company, had absolutely no idea how solar technology actually worked. So he and Paulette's younger brother Bobby, a former Ford mechanic, sat down and Googled it. They taught themselves from scratch and built the very first prototype right there in Jeff's driveway. And it worked. Not in some revolutionary, world-changing way, just in a really practical, useful way. Movie sets needed portable power, stadiums needed it, disaster relief operations needed it, event companies needed it. Clean and quiet. No diesel generators, no fumes, no noise. You drive it in, tilt the panels, and you're running. A former Roverland customer named Dave Watson spotted the strange-looking trailer sitting in Jeff's driveway one day and got curious. Dave got on the phone, rounded up some local investors, and they all met in a parking lot. Right there, they handed Jeff $368,000 to get serious about this thing. In 2008, DC Solar Solutions was officially born. And for a while, it was completely legitimate. The trailers worked, the customers were real, the contracts were real. Jeff was building something honest for the first time in his adult life, and people around him could feel it. The company started growing, the orders kept coming in. Then came that Sunday in March 2011, the baseball field, the national anthem, the tears. Nearly $29 million. A Fortune 500 company had just chosen him. Jeff called Paulette the second he got off the field. They were both stunned quiet. After the meth, the bankruptcies, the failed shops, the parking lot deals, they had actually built something real, something a major American company was willing to spend $29 million on. It should have been the finish line. But somewhere between that phone call and the moment the money actually hit the account, something shifted inside Jeff Karpoff. Because a few weeks later, he and Paulette sat down and made a very quiet decision. A decision about how to make the next $100 million. And it was going to destroy everything. Somewhere in Nevada, in the summer of 2012, a small group of people walked into a room together and closed the door behind them. No minutes were being taken. No outsiders were invited. No one was recording anything. And by the time that meeting ended, every single person who walked back out of that door was now bound to one of the largest financial frauds in American history. None of them looked like criminals. Some of them probably told themselves they were just solving a temporary cash flow problem, that things would turn around, that it was only going to be for a little while. It was never going to be for a little while. After the Sherwin-Williams deal landed, Jeff and Paulette moved fast. They restructured everything. Jeff became president of DC Solar Solutions. Paulette took control of a second company, DC Solar Distribution, where she was president, secretary, and treasurer, all at once. On paper, it looked like a clean, professional family business. 2 companies, clear roles, legitimate structure. What it actually was the perfect architecture for what they were about to build. They started going after big investors with a pitch that was almost impossible to say no to. Here's how it worked. An investor would buy a fleet of solar trailers outright. In return, they'd receive massive federal solar tax credits, the government essentially subsidizing a chunk of the purchase, plus steady lease income when DC Solar rented those units out to corporations, event companies, cell tower operators, movie studios, disaster relief agencies. Clean energy, government incentives, passive income. The kind of deal that makes accountants smile. And for a while, a real, genuine while, it actually worked. The trailers were real, some of the leases were real, some of the clients were real. Jeff was shipping units, Paulette was managing the books. It was messy, imperfect, grinding work, but it was legitimate. Then the rentals started slipping. Demand wasn't growing as fast as they needed. The returns they'd promised investors were starting to feel like a ceiling they couldn't reach no matter what they did. And that's when Jeff called the meeting. The room was filled with a handful of people who all knew each other well. employees, close associates, people who'd been with Jeff since the early days when it was just a weird trailer sitting in a Martinez driveway. The mood was the kind of heavy mood that settles in right before someone says the thing nobody wants to say out loud. Jeff laid it out plainly. The rental income wasn't covering what they owed. New investor money was still coming in strong. They could use that, just temporarily, just to bridge the gap, to cover the payments owed to existing investors, just until the real revenue caught up. Nobody stood up and walked out. And just like that, DC Solar Solutions crossed a line it would never come back from. The employees even gave it an internal nickname, almost like they needed to make it sound routine, make it sound like nothing. They called it re-renting, like it was just an accounting adjustment, like it was a footnote. It was a Ponzi scheme. Because once Jeff and Paulette decided to stop playing by the rules, they didn't do it halfway. They went completely all in. And the level of deception they constructed over the next several years was so meticulous, so layered, so deliberately engineered that it almost defies the image of the tobacco-chewing mechanic from Martinez who learned what solar panels were by Googling it. They told investors they had built roughly 17,000 mobile solar units. The real number was somewhere between 6,500. The other 10,000 units existed only on paper. Fake commissioning reports, fake lease contracts, fake financial statements. All of it fabricated, polished, and handed to investors as evidence that their money was working hard. To make the non-existent units appear active, to make it look on tracking systems like trailers were being driven around the country, fulfilling real leases, generating real power, they buried GPS trackers in the ground, literally dug holes and buried the devices so the system would register movement that was never actually happening. Someone sat in a room and thought that through, planned it, sourced the trackers, paid someone to go dig the holes. That's not panic. That is not desperation. That is deliberately, methodically engineering a lie from the ground up. And then there was the T-Mobile deal. One man was paid $1 million to sign paperwork pretending he was leasing hundreds of units to T-Mobile. $1 million just to put his name on a contract for a deal that never existed. And the money kept coming in. In total, DC Solar raised just under $1 billion from 17 investors. 17 people and companies handed this operation nearly $1 billion combined. And over 93% of the revenue keeping the entire machine running wasn't coming from solar energy rentals at all. It was just new investor money flowing straight through to old investors, a pipe dressed up to look like a river. Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's company, one of the most scrutinized, most respected, most carefully managed investment operations on the entire planet. A company built by a man whose entire reputation rests on seeing through bad deals before everyone else does. Berkshire Hathaway handed DC Solar $340 million. A broke mechanic from a California refinery town, a man who once got turned down by a cannabis dispensary, had just taken $340 million from Warren Buffett, and Buffett had absolutely no idea. Meanwhile, Jeff and Paulette had fully become different people. They bought a Ferrari dealership, not a car, a dealership. They acquired a professional minor league baseball team. They threw parties that looked like movie sets, surrounded by the kind of people who don't ask where the money comes from as long as it keeps flowing freely. Jeff, the same guy who used to chew tobacco and swallow it watching NASCAR on Sunday afternoons, was now living a life that barely seemed connected to the same reality he'd come from. And the thing about that kind of life is that it demands constant fuel, which meant the scheme couldn't stay the same size. It had to keep growing. More investors, more fake units, more buried GPS trackers, more million-dollar signatures on fictional contracts. That's the cruel trap at the heart of every Ponzi scheme. You can never slow down. The moment you slow down, the whole thing eats itself.
By 2016, the IRS had quietly started pulling at a thread. The IRS tax credits DC Solar was claiming were enormous, and the valuation numbers didn't add up. The trailers were being declared worth far more than they actually cost to build, which meant the tax credits investors were claiming were built on inflated figures. Auditors started asking questions, carefully at first, then with more urgency. Jeff and Paulette were still spending, still pitching new investors, still signing deals. From the outside, DC Solar looked exactly like what they said it was, a booming clean energy company riding the green revolution all the way to the top. But inside the operation, people who knew the truth were beginning to feel something shift, a tension that no amount of money could quite bury. Because there's a specific feeling that comes with building something on nothing. No Ferrari dealership, no party, no penthouse can fully drown it out. It lives somewhere underneath all of it. It's the feeling of knowing that somewhere, at some point, someone is going to ask the one question you don't have a fake document for. And by 2017, that someone had already found the door.
At some point in 2017, if you had driven past Jeff Karpoff's hillside home in Martinez, California, you might have noticed something strange sitting in the driveway. A 1978 Pontiac Firebird. Black. Unmistakable. The kind of car that makes you slow down and look twice. What you wouldn't have known, couldn't have known, is that car once belonged to Burt Reynolds, one of the most iconic men in American pop culture. A piece of genuine Hollywood history just sitting in a driveway in a refinery town in Northern California with a dead battery. Jeff Karpoff owned 148 cars by this point. Luxury vehicles, collector cars, rare finds, many of them just parked wherever they'd been left, slowly dying. Nobody drove them, nobody maintained them. They weren't transportation, they were proof of something. Proof that the kid who polished used tires for 10 cents each had finally become someone else entirely. That dead Firebird tells you everything you need to know about what Jeff Karpoff had become. By 2017, Jeff and Paulette had taken somewhere around $140 million directly for themselves. Not invested back into the business, not allocated for operations, for themselves. They sponsored NASCAR teams and paid to have a race officially named after the company, the DC Solar 300. They owned the Martinez Clippers, a minor league baseball team from the same town where Jeff once lost everything twice over. Private jets, expensive jewelry, football stadium suites, a life so far removed from a backstreet garage in Martinez that it would have been unrecognizable to anyone who knew them before. And at their 2018 Christmas party, their last Christmas party, though they didn't know that yet, they hired Pitbull to perform. Jeff posted about it on social media and called it epic. He wasn't wrong. It was epic, just not in the way he meant. Here's what was quietly happening underneath all of it. As far back as 2016, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division had started asking careful questions. The tax credits DC Solar was claiming were enormous, and they were built on a valuation of over $150,000 per trailer. The actual cost to build one was somewhere between $13,000 and $20,000. That gap, that vast yawning gap between what they claimed and what was real, had caught the attention of people whose entire job is to notice exactly that kind of thing. The walls were already moving closer. Jeff and Paulette just couldn't feel them yet. Then came Sebastian Jano. Jano was DC Solar's director of project finance. He wasn't an outsider or a regulator or someone hunting for problems. He was a trusted insider, someone who had been working deep inside the operation with access to the actual numbers. And in early 2018, those numbers finally told him something he couldn't unknow. He saw the circular payments laid out clearly, new investor money flowing directly to old investors over and over in a loop. He dug deeper, and what he found underneath that was worse. The 17,000 units they had been representing to investors, he cross-referenced the claims against the physical inventory. The gap was thousands of units wide. He sat with that for a moment, and then he walked in and confronted Jeff and Paulette directly, face to face, in the same building where they had all been working together. We don't know exactly what was said in that room. We know how it ended. Jano quit on the spot. And then he picked up the phone and reported every single thing he knew to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Think about what that actually takes. He was inside this thing. He knew these people. He had been sitting in those offices, part of the operation. Walking away from that and then making that call knowing exactly what it would set in motion, that is not a small thing. That is a specific kind of courage that most people never have to find out whether they possess. The SEC immediately pulled in the FBI and U.S. Attorney's Office. A joint investigation involving the FBI, the IRS Criminal Division, and several other federal agencies began tearing through everything DC Solar had ever built. And what they found confirmed every single thing Jano had told them. On December 18, 2018, early morning, Martinez, California. The hills are quiet. The Karpoff's home sits up on the slope, big and comfortable, the kind of place that quietly announces, "We made it." Then 175 FBI agents arrived, including a SWAT team. They didn't knock politely, they came through the door. And when they reached Jeff's home office and opened his safe, here is what they found. $1.7 million in cash. Not in a bank, not in an investment account, cash. Sitting in a safe in a house in Martinez, California, while the man who put it there had spent the better part of a decade telling investors their money was working hard in the clean energy sector. Assets were seized across multiple states, cars were impounded, properties were frozen, and DC Solar Solutions, the company that had started with a strange trailer in a driveway and a parking lot of hopeful local investors, filed for bankruptcy and ceased to exist. In January 2020, Jeff and Paulette Karpoff stood in a federal courtroom and pleaded guilty. Jeff admitted to conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering. Paulette admitted to conspiracy to commit an offense against the United States and money laundering. On November 11, 2021, Jeff Karpoff, now 50 years old, the mechanic from Martinez who once got turned down by a cannabis dispensary, was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. Paulette received 11 years and 3 months. Several other executives and accountants inside the operation pleaded guilty and received their own sentences alongside them. The government seized around $120 million in assets. The cars, all 148 of them, were auctioned off. Every collector car, every luxury vehicle, every piece of proof that Jeff Karpoff had made it. They sold for $8.2 million combined. The total amount raised through the scheme was close to $1 billion. $120 million was recovered, which means that somewhere out there, in accounts, in transfers, in arrangements nobody has fully untangled yet, the rest is simply gone. Nearly $800 million, and the investors who handed over their money believing they were funding clean American energy have spent years trying to understand exactly where it went. Most of them are still waiting for an answer. That answer has not come. If this story got to you, if you want more deep dives into the biggest financial frauds and corporate deceptions that most channels never go near, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and drop a comment below with the next case you want me to cover. I'll see you in the next one.